Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leela Shamash and I am very excited about today's reading vlog because I am Iraqi Jewish. Like, my mom's family is Iraqi Jewish. My grandparents were born in Iraq. My grandmother grew up in Iran, and then they immigrated to North America in the 1960s on the Queen Elizabeth. They came to New York first and then went to Montreal, and that's where my mom was born and where I'm from. And I feel very alienated from my cultural heritage. I think it's like a combination of assimilation, trauma. I basically just feel this like dark void in regard to my cultural heritage. And so I'm very interested in learning more about Iraqi Jewish history, about the recent history of Iraq and Iran, and the contemporary state of the Middle East. This has been like especially on my heart recently in the context of the genocide in Palestine. It's Passover right now, and I went to the Jewish Voices for Peace Seder action the other night, and I loved it so much. I was so moved by all of it. And when the Mizrahi girls, speaking for a Jewish Arabic contingent, talked about their experience, I was like, that's me, you know, I'm really interested in learning more. So I'm on sort of like a heritage quest. Yeah, like, I know that being Jewish and Arabic is really not a contradiction. It's this like strong propagandistic myth that like Jews and Arabs are like absolute enemies is a construction that's not necessarily the truth. Like, when my grandmother told me about a pogrom, she said that their Muslim neighbors protected Jews, and literally the oldest Jewish community in the world is from what is now called Iraq, and that is where the Talmud was written. And I think today there isn't a single Jew left in Iraq. And I'm really interested in understanding that history that's unfolded within the past 100 years. So this video is part of that. Let's get into the books that I want to talk about. So actually, something that one of the organizers said at the JVP Seder really resonated with me. I wrote it in my journal where I pasted this pamphlet from the event too. Her grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and she said, "I refuse to allow my family's history and trauma to be used to justify genocide in Palestine." And I resonate with and appreciate that message so much. And it's something that I've been sort of thinking and talking about over the past like year and a half, since there's been a lot of local attention on the war in Palestine, which is that there's trauma that is held in the body and passed down intergenerationally as a result of the persecution of Jews. I know that. Like, I personally experienced that. And I was raised like culturally Jewish, anti-Zionist. But what I have been saying that I really have an issue with is that I feel like that trauma gets manipulated by people in power who do have an agenda to colonize, to commit genocide so that they can claim territory for oil, so that they can grow their wealth and power, that they sort of hijack and take advantage of that fear and trauma in the body and say, oh, like, this group wants to kill you, like, so we have to annihilate them. And like, that is a lie. Like, that is propaganda, and it takes advantage of the vulnerability of people who carry that trauma in their body, who are like, oh my god, like, I'm threatened, this is World War II again. But it's not, it's something different. Anyway, all of that to say, when my girlfriend and I were in California over the winter holidays, we went to City Light Books in San Francisco, and I picked this up with the money that my mom had gifted me for Hanukkah. So this is Taking the State Out of the Body, A Guide to Embodied Resistance to Zionism by Eliana Rubin. There's my City Lights bookmark, and it's published by PM Press. I'm thinking of starting this in this vlog. This is nonfiction, and I think it's going to take like a lot of time to fully read and absorb, but I wanted to mention it and maybe start it and discuss some of it in this video. Last year, I, of course, read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, and I felt really moved and like transformed in terms of what I consider possible as for Persian/Arabic writing in the diaspora, if that makes sense. Like, for a long time, I've been wanting to connect more with my cultural heritage and maybe learn Jewish Arabic or study ancient Mesopotamian mythology. And I'm still very interested in those things. But what I hadn't realized that Kaveh Akbar really inspired me with in this book is that he wrote from his perspective as an American, as an Iranian American, who's Iranian, of his experience of diaspora and cultural sort of disconnection, but also connection. Like, basically, I love that he wrote from his unique perspective as someone who is American, who has Iranian heritage, who has, you know, a lot of complexity there about just exactly his experience, and that sort of sense of disconnection or void or loss and not knowing is like a huge part of the experience of being Iranian American. I'm very excited about the TBR for this video, which is fundamentally by Nussaibah Younis and Liquid by Mariam Rahmani. Okay, I'm so excited about this. Like, I was so excited about Martyr, and now I am so excited about these because these are books by Iraqi and Iranian women, respectively, who are sapphic, I believe. I think that each of these stories has some sapphic vibes. So yes, I'm so excited about these. I think that fundamentally is about a British woman who ends up going to Iraq as part of a UN project to de-radicalize ISIS brides. And from what I understand, it's like exploring the complexity of saviorism, and there is some sapphic romance, sapphic energy in this as well. So I'm really excited about that. Also, this edition that I got came with some cute stuff, like this little chocolate bar and this poster that says The Ultimate Heartbreak Survival Guide. So that is very cute. And then Liquid, if I understand correctly, is about a queer Muslim girl in LA who wants to marry rich and sort of takes that on like a project, but I think maybe ultimately this project brings her back to Iran. So I'm very interested to see how that all plays out. Also, I'm so impressed and inspired by both of these authors' education. Nussaibah Younis studied at Oxford, Durham, and Harvard and has a PhD in international affairs. And Mariam Rahmani holds a PhD from UCLA and an MFA from Columbia, as well as degrees from Princeton and Oxford, and currently teaches at Bennington College, which is the secret history university. So that is very impressive and inspiring and makes me even more excited to read these books. I also have this little poetry book, which I think I picked up at the New York Zine Fest. I love that dedication it says for the girls. And I was just so happy when I found it because like it's pink. I feel like that looks like me, and it's Arabic. It says bint means girl, and it says the girl in these pages attempts to reconcile an American identity just as the din of tradition continues to conjure a valley of mirrors. This author I think is Lebanese, so I might reread this. So yeah, that is the TBR for this video, and I'm so excited to get into it. Hi, I'm here with a reading update, which is that I have finished the first half of Liquid. There are my tabs. I'm up to the section called Tehran. I read the first section, which was Los Angeles. So far, this has been like the perfect book for me right now because I've been feeling like depressed in response to like rising fascism and my own economic struggles, not too dissimilar from this protagonist's. And it's like a rom-com. It's like a literary intellectual rom-com, which is like perfect for me because like I want to read like a fun, easy book, but I just cannot get into a conventional straight romance that's just like enforcing all the structures of oppression. And I also can't or like don't want to turn off critical thinking. Like it's scary to do that in fascist times. So anyway, this is perfect for me. When I read the opening paragraph, I was immediately reminded of The Pisces by Melissa Broder, my literary mother, which is one of my favorite books of all time. So that is like a very good sign. I was like, let's go. This book is also kind of reminding me of Milk Fed by mother Melissa Broder for its sort of themes of religion as that connects with love. The first thing that I noted about this book was about colonialism. The text engages with post-colonialism. It is certainly critical of American imperialism, but doesn't really seem to engage critically with American colonialism in the sense of America as a colonizing force of indigenous land within so-called America. Like on page 2, she's like, whoever was here before, and like there's like the use of the term powwow. Also, this is published by an imprint of Hachette called Algonquin, and I looked that up and I was like, is this, and it's definitely not named in the context of the indigenous group that it refers to. It was literally named after an army steamship, but there's a statement on their website like acknowledging the indigenous name and saying that they're like committed to like supporting indigenous people. So okay, and this is set in 2019 and references Trump's like Muslim ban, and also very much engages with like the legacy of 9/11 and how the Bush administration sort of laid the foundation for Trump's current actions. The protagonist is Muslim, and I'm finding it very interesting how she criticizes both her own religion from inside its culture and also Islamophobia. And like part of her backstory is that she chose to wear the hijab in America in the 2000s, and that like makes me think about how wearing the hijab in America versus Iran is a very different signifier. Like in Persepolis, which is by an Iranian woman about the oppression of the Islamic Revolution, like you see how the hijab is like an instrument of oppression, and the same thing in reading Lolita in Tehran, both of which I read. I love Persepolis. I appreciated reading Lolita in Tehran for like its education about Iranian culture and the recent history of Iran. I found that it did sort of like equate all things Western and American with liberation, so it kind of like doesn't surprise me that that book is like really embraced by the West, and I don't necessarily feel the same way as like the spirit of the text seems to in regard to like British and American culture representing freedom. I also thought that reading Lolita in Tehran was valuable in its representation of the slow boil of a totalitarian regime, and honestly I keep referring to that in my mind as I am experiencing events in America right now. Anyway, so the protagonist of this story is an academic. She recently completed her PhD, which was about marriage, and her life has gotten worse since graduating. Like she is under 2 unemployed, and I, a year out of my MFA, really appreciate how relatable that is. And so she basically decides to marry rich and takes on this project of going on 100 dates in order to be engaged by fall semester, and the story is set in the summer. So you see the sort of rom-com structure set up there, and she has this best friend Adam who's right there. And then it gets interesting because the text like is like engaging with the friends to lovers trope. Like the character criticizes it and sort of researches it at the same time as so far like enacting the trope. Like we touched arms, a tingle went up my own. So for me, like the tension there is like, is this story going to follow through on the conventional romance friends to lovers trope plot structure, or is it going to subvert my expectations of that setup, which is what I'm kind of hoping for, but I think it's going to be ultimately a friends to lovers romance. And she said something about arranged marriage. She says, in my dissertation, in what, against increasingly bad odds, a part of me still hoped would be my first book, I had waged a critique of what scholars called companionate marriage, aka the modern concept of liking the person you marry, of being both friends and lovers. Before that, marriage was a contract. In both the West and the Islamic world, you traded goods, not feelings. Women offered sex and offspring, men food and shelter. And later she talks about how in an arranged marriage, what would often happen is that the couple would fall in love over time. And that does sort of mirror friends to lovers. And I found that very interesting because my grandparents had an arranged marriage. They got married in Iran when my grandma was 16 and my grandpa was 21, and I think they had only met each other once before that. And my mom, who got her master's in anthropology, would always talk to me about like the value of an arranged marriage, in that like 2 similar families who shared cultural values like made a match, and it was an agreement, it was a contract. It was like, we are going to be partners in the project of doing family. Like the husband will work, the wife will homemake. And my grandma certainly loved my grandpa. Like he died 10 years before her, and she was a painter. She painted flower still lifes, and after he died she never painted again. She loved him, and I was 5 when he died, so I don't really remember their relationship. And I guess other than them, I personally have like literally 0 role models of successfully married adults, and I do aspire to lifelong monogamous committed marriage. And at one point when I sort of realized that I wanted that, I read a lot of books about marriage and relationships to try to understand like what it is, because I had no examples from life, so I tried to learn from books. And like the main thing that I learned is that marriage is not like about passion, it's about decision and commitment. And like for a passionate love connection to be sustained in a lifelong marriage, like the key thing is that you decide to stay. So kind of like a more traditional approach there. On page 95-96, I noted that there's a sort of articulation of what I think is like the thesis. She writes, my research, put in academic terms, existed at the intersection of queer theory, feminist histories, and Iranian studies to analyze the ways the modern, Western-inflected institution of companionate marriage, which defined marriage as a union between 2 individuals rather than 2 families or even communities, eventually introducing the affective language of, quote, love into the equation as the basis for any relationship, and thus occulting marriage's legal ramifications and obscuring its power dynamics, help structure and reinforce the codependent systems of binary gender and heterosexuality in pre- and post-revolutionary Iran via international literature and film. That really made me think of reading Lolita in Tehran, because that author sort of speaks about Jane Austen as like a symbol of liberation, and Austen is like the epitome of Western marriage romantic romance ideas. She starts doing academic research on the friends to lovers trope, and she's like rewatching all these rom-coms. By the way, I totally agree that You've Got Mail is capitalist propaganda, and I do find that very interesting. Like, she's referencing like post-structuralism and the idea of like an intra-diegetic narrative as she is developing this point of arranged marriage as friends to lovers and exploring the friends to lovers trope like within this story. And I am finding it like very formally interesting. I do also find that it does have sort of like an emotionally detached academic tone, which maybe is part of the story. Like, the protagonist is a jaded academic and is in a way like a conventional rom-com protagonist who like doesn't see that love was right there all along, and like, you know, was like a fool for love despite being so intellectual, if it does turn out to be a conventional rom-com, which I think it is gonna be, so we'll see. And that also kind of comes through though, like in her treatment of politics. Like, I noticed that when she describes a climate changed summer day, but like it's not like she is like endorsing global warming. Like, later she talks about climate denial in a way that like you can tell is critical, and the character ultimately says that she wants justice. So like, that's interesting. And then also the academic tone is kind of addressed on page 141. She writes, you know, that's always been my problem with academic criticism. It's too abstract. Art is about feeling something, going wild, falling head over heels, thinking with your heart. So I have a feeling that like the protagonist might like live that in this next part, which we're about to see. Also, her father just had a heart attack, so there's something to that symbolically. And that's what's bringing her back to Iran. So there's a big confrontation of her culture, family, heart. We'll see how it all plays out. I'm loving this. I'm addicted. I like cannot wait to keep reading. I also wanted to mention this book's engagement with class and sex and the sort of cultural position of the educated writer is reminding me of Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman, and also the vibes of like wealth and marriage and adultery and just like it being literary fiction reminds me also of Portrait of a Mirror. Gonna keep reading Liquid. I just had the best time reading and hanging out with my friend Shelly. I have like under 50 pages of the book left, and I'm very moved by it. Hi. I finished Liquid this morning, and I'm just like, wow. Like, you know, when you finish a book and you're just like, wow, like kind of stunned, like that's how I feel. There are my annotations. I did go for that red and pink progression, and I am very happy with the result. Yeah, wow, I found this to be a very excellent book. I'm stunned. Okay, what did I write in my notes? Okay, so I did notice this moment of femme for femme phobia, and I did take offense. I'm just kidding, but I did notice that. And the protagonist is bisexual, and at one point she says of herself something along the lines of like, she's not queer enough or something. And with that context, I was like really hoping as I was reading the second half especially that the story would sort of queer or not entirely enforce the like heteronormative plot structure of like a conventional romance novel in its sort of critical engagement with the friends to lovers trope. And it certainly explores queerness and identity at the same time as being a rom-com. And I personally did feel a little bit disappointed by the ending and wondered about the significance of, spoiler, her not choosing Layli, who is the Iranian lesbian that she meets in Tehran. By the way, I loved the explanation of Layli's name meaning night, and so I like wondered about the significance of that. But I think ultimately this is like a very real story about complex people, and Layli and Adam are like complex characters. They're not just symbols of their culture, though they do exist in the context of their respective cultures. I do like that Adam is Jewish and that she's gone to Passover at his mom's house with him. I think that's really sweet, and I was interested in this book's treatment of the different signification of the hijab in Iran versus America. Like I was thinking about in part one, it totally goes there in part two. And I was also very interested in its reference to the impact of 9/11 and the Iraq War. And I'm looking forward to exploring more of that in Fundamentally. There is a pomegranate motif in this story, which I found very interesting. And I think I got the idea that the title is referring to sex emotion and also liquid assets. And there's a plot with a house in Tehran that was her father's house, but which we see was also her grandmother's house, and her mother had a role in the story of the ownership of that house. And the plot there was actually very Austinian, and I found that very interesting, actually, like both the plot itself and its engagement with the complexities of like wealth, colonialism, gentrification, migration, etc., and also its engagement with the sort of liberal feminist herstory in English literature as seen in Jane Austen, who is like one of the referential figures in this text. I also appreciated the reference to Forufa Rosad, and I'll definitely be looking into her work. At one point, the narrator talks about this idea of imagined community, and that felt very relevant to my personal experience reading this book and my Arabic Persian heritage. I felt very moved by the protagonist's mother's commitment to culture and intellect, and also her realism about survival as an immigrant and her relationship to theory and like their references to Edward Said. That kind of reminded me of my mom and our relationship, and I did recommend this book to my mom. So yeah, overall, I feel that this was a very excellent book. I'm still kind of processing and recovering from the experience of reading it, so I don't feel ready to jump right into fundamentally, which I expect to be kind of intense. I did start taking the state out of the body, and I really loved what I read so far. I loved the author's references to liberation satyrs and witchy high holiday rituals, and especially this quote, "Interrupting the weaponization of Jewish trauma as a justification for colonization and genocide in Palestine." Yes. Like, just yes to that. So I'm definitely looking forward to continuing this book. It is also sort of a lot to process, and this author is a somatic healer, and they sort of weave somatics into the text, and it even includes like exercises for processing the information, which I find very interesting, but it's definitely not something that I can like engage with lightly or read very quickly. So I'm looking forward to the ongoing project of reading and processing this information. I feel like I might actually read Gay Girl Prayers by Emily Austen next. This is a book of poetry. As I shared in my last vlog, I read and really loved We Could Be Rats by Emily Austen. So I bought this from Hive Mind, and I've been really looking forward to reading it. And I'm like, maybe some Christian trauma is actually just what we need to balance out this reading list, get all three Abrahamic religions represented, and it is Easter. So I will let you know how that goes, and I will check in with my next update. Hello, it is a couple days later, and I am here with a reading update. So I read Gay Girl Prayers, and I ended up having like a really hard day and essentially needed God. And I found God in Emily Austen's poetry. This book made me cry multiple times, and I loved it so much. Absolute 5 stars. Cannot recommend highly enough that you buy a copy from your local independent bookstore and read it. Here are some of my favorite lines. First of all, I love that the dedication is to anyone who was taught that they were going to hell. I love heaven is 10 girls who take their lamps to each other's bedchambers to read lesbian erotica and make out. Yes. I love fortune tellers know thou shalt relish a witch to live. Amen. Oh my god, the Song of Shulamit was so beautiful and really evoked Sappho to me. I especially loved the references to lavender and violets, and the stanza, "I have compared her, my love, to the company of unicorns in Sappho's garden." And then, by the way, if you do read this and you love it and you haven't already, you absolutely must read Anne Carson's translations of Sappho, if not Winter. And actually, I got mine signed by Anne Carson in Halifax when she came to King's when I was there. Love that. Oh, I loved in the Sign of the Cross when she says, "In the name of trans lesbians, T for Ts, non-binary bisexuals, and all queer trans people. Amen." I love "Give us our daily oat milk and deliver us from conservative politicians." Amen. I cried at Love is Proud. I cried at Ruth and Naomi's love story, "For wherever you go, I will U-Haul." I love that in the acknowledgements, she thanks the Catholic Church for the trauma. And I just think it's so perfect the way she writes in her bio that she lives in Ottawa, which is the territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I love that. So I love Emily Austen so much. And I'm so excited because I got my copy of Interesting Facts About Space and I cannot wait to read this. I am 80 pages into Fundamentally. There are my current annotations. I was trying to get them to match the eyeshadow. And I'm finding this book very compelling. I was a little bit scared to pick it up, honestly, because I thought that it might be very intense and stressful because of the subject matter. And there have been a couple of moments where there were glimpses of these traumatic elements, but for the most part, it's actually very humorous. Any intensity is really offset by humor. This is a very comedic book that's written in a lighthearted tone that it kind of reminds me of Legally Blonde, where it's this girly is in this serious situation. I am totally entranced and really looking forward to continue reading. They just talked about rollerblading around the parks in London, which made me so happy because I love roller skating around the park in Brooklyn. Oh, also purple is brought up a lot in this book. I feel like it might be the author's favorite color, and it is mine as well, so I do enjoy that. Also, I wanted to mention how pleased I am that my book matches my seltzer can. That just makes me so happy. Anyway, this afternoon I'm going to hive mind and I'm going to bring my book, and I will talk to you with my next update. Hello. I just thought that I would check in and let you know that I'm a bit over halfway through Fundamentally now. There are my annotations. I am loving this book. I am totally enthralled. I feel like I'm learning more about political reality and the cultural and political landscape, but I'm also really enjoying the book. Every single one of these characters is hilarious and also endearing. It's really compelling. The only thing that I don't like is that the protagonist harshly judges herself and other women's bodies, but even that I feel is sort of situated within a context of feminist thought. So yeah. Hello. It is the following morning and I finished Fundamentally at 2:15 a.m. last night. That's how my annotations are. I kind of hate the yellow, so I honestly am thinking of changing them out to another sort of lilac color. But oh my god, this book was crazy. I got so addicted to the action last night. That was a wild ride. Yeah, wow. I'm stunned. I'm stunned by this book. That was incredible. A couple things that I noted. I found the mother-daughter relationship to be very compelling and real, and I loved that. It was actually reminding me of the book Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. My copy is at my mom's house and I read it a while ago, but I remember being very stunned by the mother-daughter relationship, being I'm at a loss for words. And I remember that the precision of the vocabulary was stunning. And I think that's set in the context of India. So yeah, there is so much complexity explored in Fundamentally, and I'm probably still going to be processing it for a little while. I loved it so much. I really did. The only thing that didn't really sit well with me was that personal pronouns and non-binary identity are kind of used as a punchline without trans representation or any sort of positive reinforcement of trans validity. So that made me feel a little stressed when I encountered that, but I think that part of this book's style is sort of irreverent, edgy humor. Also, why is Tom still around? I just want Nadia to live her best lesbian life. But anyway, I am obviously kind of tired and not that eloquent this morning, but I loved this book and I am really grateful for it. And I'm just really impressed by the accomplishment of having written an extremely compelling novel that I found unputdownable, that kept me up until 3 in the morning, that features profound, complex exploration of Middle Eastern politics, religion, religious trauma, religious extremism, colonization, saviorism, freedom. It was amazing. I was reminded of that meme where there's like a woman in a burqa and a woman in a bikini, and originally it was like, oh, they're both thinking like, oh, she's so oppressed, but then people edited it to say she's so hot. I feel like if I had to summarize this book in a meme, it would be that, and I love that. So yeah, I loved this book. I loved it. Thank you. And then this morning I did read Bint, and I felt really grateful for it. I feel like I understood it a little more deeply now that I've read Liquid and Fundamentally. And when Allie saw me reading it, she was like, your book looks exactly like you. And I was like, thank you so much. And like, that is just like the magic that I feel with these reads, is that like, it is so special to find a book that looks exactly like you, when that's not something that you've necessarily experienced in the majority of media for the majority of your life. So I'm really grateful for this representation, truly. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it to the end, maybe comment a little purple flower emoji and let me know if you read any of these books, what your thoughts on them are, or what you are reading currently. I would truly love to know. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.